I'm just stalling. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome back. I have taken a very short break because I've just had a lot going on and I get overwhelmed very easily and I just needed some time. So it's all good. I'm fine. Who cares? You don't. But all is well with me now, so that's all good. Don't panic. I know you were. So I am back and I'm going to start posting consistently again, she says. I will try. I have actually started writing scripts again today, so that's good. We don't have to go over the same boring ones all over again. I have got myself a new iPad, so I've now got a little one so I can carry it around with me, so it makes editing a hell of a lot easier for me. I don't have to lug around this massive thing that I'm filming on. And I don't know how much longer the big thing I'm filming on is gonna last realistically, because it's already smashed and it keeps jumping off the stand that I'm putting it on. So if it keeps throwing itself off at the rate it is at the moment, it's not gonna last the week. I also stopped filming because I just felt so insecure about my face. I'm getting so spotty at the moment. I don't really know what's going on with my skin, but I've got an appointment with the doctor on Thursday, so hopefully they can sort me out in some way. I don't know if it's, well, it is hormonal, but I don't know how to stop it and I don't know what's going on. I have made a very pathetic attempt to turn this into a freckle. I'm fooling absolutely no one. It's quite clearly a massive spot. So today I've got a really interesting case. You may have heard of it. I had kind of heard of it just because of the way that the killer is caught, but the rest of the details of the case I absolutely did not know, so you may have brushed over it at some point. I think I only really have one trigger warning for this case. It does very loosely brush upon suicide, so if that's something you don't want to listen to or deal with at the moment, that's totally fine and I'll see you for another video. Like I say, it does loosely kind of go into it, but things are mentioned. Content warning, as always, strong language. I would also like to mention this is a Polish case and my pronunciation is horrendous with English words, so I'm going to apologise in advance because I am not going to be able to pronounce things the way they should pronounce, but I will try my absolute best, so please bear with me. We're starting our case in December in 2000 and a group of friends had gone fishing in the river Oder, the Oder River, and whilst they were there, one of them spotted something in the river and went over to investigate further, see exactly what it was they were looking at. He originally thought it might be a log, but as he walked over and got a better look, he could see some hair. So he got his fishing rod and gave it a poke and they discovered it was the body of a man. Police were called and they recovered the body from the water, and it was immediately quite clear that this had not been an accident and they needed to launch a murder investigation into the death of this gentleman. He was wearing only a sweater and underwear, so it was quite clear to see the injuries that he had all over his body. The gentleman also had a noose around his neck, and this was also tying his hands together as well. So it had been tied in such a way that if he would have tried to get his hands out of the rope, it would have just tightened it around his neck. Upon performing an autopsy on the man, it was clear that he was alive when he was originally thrown into the water, as he had water in his lungs. There was also basically no food found in his digestive system, stomach, anywhere. So it was clear that he'd been starved for around several days before he had been taken to be dumped in the water. So it appeared he had been kept somewhere and lightly tortured. The body was of Dariusz Janzlowski and he had been reported missing around 4 weeks prior to being found. Dariusz was a 35-year-old businessman who was last seen on November 13th. He had left his advertising business to go and meet with a client and was reported missing the next day by his wife, who had reported that he'd not come home and he was not answering any of her phone calls. Dariusz was known as a harmless and gentle soul who owned a small advertising company and would play guitar in his spare time. He had had marital problems, but the couple had worked through that and they were now in the process of adopting a child. Nobody could quite believe it that it was Dariusz's body that they had found, as he had no enemies, no debts, no criminal record. They couldn't quite figure out who on earth would want to do something like this to Dariusz. So investigators were left with quite a difficult job because they had no leads from kind of friends and family, and the searches that they had on the grounds and the people that they were sending in to dive under, there was just nothing really coming back. Eventually, Darius's case ran cold because there was just absolutely no leads. Every lead that they thought they had just came to a complete dead end. Okay, so I have absolutely no idea how to pronounce the detective name. In my head, I'm reading it as Jack, but it's probably not Jack. I'm going to have a go, and then I'm probably just going to either call him Jack or the detective, because I'm so sorry. So 3 years later, in the fall of 2003, Jack Roboleski is a detective, and the cold case falls onto his desk. He had been with the force for around 10 years, and he just had a passion for catching criminals and was fascinated with trying to understand the criminal mind. We're not 100% sure what really struck chords with him about Darius's case, but he became absolutely determined to find out what had happened to Darius and who killed him. It almost became an obsession for him. The first thing that Jack theorised was that the killing was personal. There was clearly no motive of robbery, as Darius had had his personal belongings on him. He had cards, money, and no one had used these bank cards or even taken them off him. So robbery immediately went out as a motive. The way Darius's body was found, he was in a basically humiliating position, and he had just been stripped down to his pants and his jumper. So whoever had done this wanted to humiliate him. The killing was also needlessly violent. That it was excessively violent for no reason. And this just screams that it's personal. Someone is pissed off with Darius and wants to cause him harm and suffering. Jack wanted to start by retracing the steps and the last known movements of Darius. And so he's looking through all the police files, and there is a note from Darius's mother. Darius's mother worked for him as a bookkeeper, and she was at the the firm that day, and she takes a phone call on the day that Darius goes missing around 9:30 a.m. And it's a gentleman on the phone. She doesn't know who it is. He doesn't tell her who he is. And he says he needs 3 signs making and has to speak to Darius. And he only wants to speak to Darius. He's not willing to give his mother really any information about anything he wants, anything he needs, or why he specifically only wants to talk to Darius. She did try and get more details out of him, but he was not having any of it. He only wanted to talk to Darius, which is a bit odd. So she gives over Darius's phone number, his mobile number, so this gentleman can ring Darius himself. When he got back to the advertising firm, his mum asks him about the phone call, and Darius just says, oh, it's a client. He wants to meet for some boards that he wants like a billboard size advertisement, and then 2 other boards. So he says he's going to meet him that afternoon to go over everything. Both of these mysterious calls were made from a payphone, which was not far down the road. It was not far from where the actual, I don't want to call it a store, but I'm going to say store. It's not far from when the store was at all. So we could have easily just kind of come in. But because it was made from a payphone, this was a dead end. A receptionist who worked for Darius also said that when he left that afternoon, she saw what she thought was 2 men following him. But again, this was basically useless information because she couldn't give a description of either of these men. Darius's car was left in his office parking lot, which was weird because normally when he'd go to meet clients, he would drive there. But again, there was kind of no explanation for this either, and Jack had reached a dead end and was going to have to dig deeper into something else. So Jack decides to dig into Darius's phone records. Now, at the time, because it's early 2000s, there's not a massive amount of technology with phones and getting information from them. So initially, all they could see was that the phone had not been used since Darius's death. But eventually, they were able to figure out that phones had serial numbers. So they were able to track exactly where the phone was from the serial number. Thankfully, Darius's widow kept either the box or the receipt from the phone and had the serial number on it. Jack was able to see that Darius's phone was actually sold 4 days after Darius went missing, and it was sold on an online auction website called Allegro, which from what I understand is like Polish eBay. The person who was selling this phone was under the username ChrisB7. Seller was 37-year-old Krystian Bala. And Krystian, from what I can kind of gauge from him, thinks he's the smartest man in the room always, which we love. He was known as one of the brightest students at his university when he went, and he became obsessed with postmodern philosophers, which I don't really know what that means, but it just sounds like something I just really wouldn't be interested in. So I didn't Google any deeper. Krystian eventually dropped out of his PhD at university. From what I can only assume is that he was too good for it. That's the vibe I get. And he dropped out to start his business in the late 90s. And this was to support his wife and his young son. But unfortunately, this business venture did not go as planned and eventually bankrupted him. And his marriage was also starting to fall apart as well because this guy was a womanizer. Krystian eventually left Poland and started travelling around USA, Japan and South Korea from what I can recall. And he became an English teacher and a scuba diving instructor. And he often boasted to his friends that he was capable of anything, which just... okay. When Jack started looking into Krystian, he was very sceptical that he could be connected to the murder in any way, just because of how meticulously planned the rest of the murder seemed to have been, and how sloppy this would be if Krystian was in fact the murderer, because he's not gone under an alias online or anything like that. It's obviously very, very easy to track that he's the one who sold it, so it just didn't seem to kind of fit in with the rest of the plan. Jack's kind of reasoning for this was that he could have just found it on the street and sold it. He could have been given it by someone else. He could have bought it off someone else. So there was nothing to tie him to the murder at this point. Jack started to dive into Krystian a little bit deeper because he just had a bit of a hunch and just thought, bit fishy, we need to do some digging here. And he found that Krystian was a self-published author. In early 2003, Krystian completed his lifelong dream of publishing a book, and his book was called Amok, which hasn't been translated into English, which is really annoying because I am very intrigued to read it. I do like kind of reading things like that, especially when they're linked to other things. I don't know if you've heard of Elliot Rodgers. I have got a case on him coming. And he wrote a 200-page manifesto about how hard his life was, and I read all of it and it made me want to stick my head in an oven, but it was interesting. So Jack brought a copy of this book, and it's quite disturbing from what I've heard about it, and it's kind of one man's downfall, and there's graphic descriptions of his womanizing and drug use and alcoholism, and then in the end the main character murders his girlfriend. Sounds like barrel of laughs. From what I understand about this book, Krystian basically wrote a book about everything that happened to him in his life. He'd wrote about how he'd had a failed business, like the main character, had had a failed business. He'd separated from his wife because of his womanizing. He had problems with alcohol. And him and his friend had been arrested previously from stealing a statue from a church, and it even stuck that in there. So it's like, how much can you lack creativity that even when you're writing a book, it has to be based on you, or are you just that self-obsessed? I'm not sure which one it is. Probably the latter. So near the end of the book, where the character starts talking about killing his girlfriend, he binds her with a noose and wraps that around her neck and I believe around her wrists. The character does actually stab the girlfriend, and obviously Darius didn't have any stab wounds on him, but the character sells the murder weapon on, not eBay, but eBay, I forgot the name. Now, a lot of the similarities that Jack was noticing between the murder in the book and the murder of real life were details that hadn't actually been released to the public, and he just had a hunch. He obviously knew that you couldn't arrest him just on the book. That's not enough evidence. But he just thought, this is very, very similar and something just doesn't feel right. We haven't released this. How does he know about this? It's just too much of a coinkydink. So Jack couldn't prove it yet. After all, the book was fictional and all the evidence that Jack currently had was purely circumstantial. But Jack was very determined, so he just kept digging and digging and digging. And he found that, I don't know if he'd looked at it or bought it or what. Krystian had bought, I can't remember, basically a police guide that described in great detail the difference between criminal, accidental and self-inflicted hanging. And this guide also included how to tie a noose. He never purchased the manual. He didn't purchase it, but he was obviously looking at it and reading it or something. I don't know. He was doing something with it. This was definitely evidence that he had planned Darius's murder. I don't know what that was. In the fall of September 2005, Krystian was arrested. Now, Krystian's account of him being arrested and Jack's account of him being arrested are worlds apart. So Krystian claims that he was basically kidnapped. They'd put a bag over his head. They told him they were going to kill him. They beat the crap out of him and drove him to a remote location and then took him to the police station. Whereas Jack said, no, it was just in the street. We just handcuffed him, put him in the back of a van and took him to the police station. So we're not really sure who's telling the truth. I mean, we're pretty sure we know who's telling the truth, but for argument's sake, we don't know who's telling the truth. So obviously he said that he had absolutely nothing to do with Darius, didn't know who he was. Polygraph tests were conducted and they came back inconclusive. I think they're a heap of shit and a waste of time anyway. Darius claimed he was being persecuted for his art. Now, so Jack was still obviously trying to get some more evidence so he could present this in court and give this to a jury, and jury would convict him, because at the minute there's still mainly circumstantial evidence. There's just not enough to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he had done this. So there's a show in Poland called 997, which I believe is like the Polish version of like America's Most Wanted and Crime Watch and things like that. And there was a section about Darius's murder on there. Now, I believe that they had a website. So there was a section of that website that was dedicated to Darius and people coming forward with information and things like that. And Jack had the genius idea to check the traffic that was coming into that website. And when he did that, he was quite confused and shocked to see that there was people from USA, from Japan and South Korea looking at this website, because how the hell would they know about it? And so what he did is he had Krystian's passport. So he checked the dates that his passport had been stamped from when he went to all these places, and then checked the data on the computer, and surprise, surprise, they all linked up. So he was checking this often to see what new information had come in about Darius's case, which again is obviously a red flag. People, that's the thing with a lot of killers, like they like to go back to the scene of the crime and they like to check up what's going on. Like a lot of killers will often join search parties for their victims knowing that they're already dead and where they are. It's just one of those things that's a bit weird. Now, the phone calls that I mentioned earlier that were made from a payphone that came into Darius's office and also Darius's cell phone, they were made from a phone booth. And I don't know if this is just an old school thing that I've never heard of, or if it's just a thing that they have in Poland, but they have a card, like a phone card that you put in. So he'd put in his phone card. So it was him that made those phone calls. So again, it was him that he was going to meet, that Darius was going to meet. He was going to meet Krystian. Around the time of the murder, Krystian's life was in shambles. His business had just failed. He was ready to separate. His wife was ready to separate from him. And she'd just had enough. So it was also noted that he was described as a very, very, very jealous and controlling man. He was very jealous of anyone who ever looked at his wife. I believed he'd launched himself at a barman who he believed was flirting with his wife, and this was just a few days after Darius's body was found, and he was heard saying, "I've already dealt with the last guy who hit on my wife." So Krystian's definitely now ex-wife is called Stasia, and initially when police tried to talk to her, she didn't want to talk really, and she just wasn't interested, and she didn't think it really had anything to do with her. But Stasia's friend came forward and said that they'd actually met Darius at a nightclub a few weeks before he went missing, and Stasi and Darius were talking. Obviously Darius was having problems in his own relationship, so he'd gone out and started talking to Stasia and had a bit of a flirt, and I believe they actually went on a date a week or so later. But nothing ever came from this. They obviously just weren't the right fit, they weren't the right match for each other, so nothing else came from that. It was just a bit of flirting. A few weeks after their date, Krystian had turned up at Stasia's house in a drunken rage and said that he had hired a private investigator, and he knew that she'd been on a date and who it was with, and just kicked off. And just to sweeten the deal even more, we've now got a motive, and the last line of his book, called Amok, this was the one killed by blind jealousy. I mean, you've just he just put it together like the best puzzle ever. I mean, not the best puzzle ever. I mean, best puzzle ever because he solved it and no one else had. It was 3 years later that he's finally got all the parts together and he's got the motive, he's got enough evidence to take it to court and send that fucker on trial. So in February 2007, Krystian Bala went on trial, and the evidence that Jack had got together was enough to convince the jury and put Krystian away for 25 years. Now, Krystian was contacted quite a lot in jail by reporters because I believe this story was quite big over in Poland, just because of the nature of it, just being ratted out by your own writing because you have you don't have any creativity, so you base it on your own life and things that have happened. So this was quite shocking. So it was a very big story, especially when it went to trial, and I think it was quite interesting for people to sit in court. I believe in Polish court, the defendant can question the witness, and he took full advantage of that. I don't think he shut up. I think he was just constantly badgering everyone with questions. So that must have been quite a sight. But when he was contacted by reporters, he was just interested in telling them about his new book that he had planning coming out. And this did lead police to believe that he was actually planning a second murder. Stasia had a new husband, a new boyfriend named Harry, and we're pretty sure he would have killed him too. They did find evidence on his computer that he was planning a second murder. I don't know exactly what that is, but they also found a folder called Amok, which is obviously the name of his book. And it had very graphic descriptions of women that he'd been with, and there was over 70 of them. Why? So yeah, that is the story of the gentleman who ratted himself out, basically. He got caught by his own writing, which is just insane. And I would like to read Amok. If anyone can find me an English translated version, or if anyone would like to just read the whole thing and translate it into English for me and send me a voice note, that would be great. I have a very, 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 very easy positive of the thought of the day today because, well, it might not be positive. I don't know yet. I'm just staying positive about it. So I love Falling in Reverse, and they have posted today about a tour they're going on, but they've called it a world tour and they put world tour in caps. So I'm not an idiot to assume that means they're going on a world tour. At the minute, they've only released dates for South America, and I cannot afford to pay however much for the tickets, flights, hotel, and everything else. So I could do with them coming a bit closer this way to somewhere in Europe, because I don't think he's allowed in the UK, although I might write Charlie a letter. But yeah, Falling in Reverse might be going on tour, and if they do, I will spend the money on a meet and greet. I don't even care. Keep your opinion to yourself about Ronnie Radke. I'm a big fan. Their music bangs. Sorry, I'm just very excited. The prospect of they might actually be coming somewhere this way is very exciting. That's it from me today. I will be doing another weird one next week. I'm looking at it now. That's what I'm looking at. Just really discreetly looking over there. Make good choices. If you're going to get away with murder, don't write about it in a book. If your exes or current partners who you're separated from move on, maybe just get over it, because it was your fault you broke up in the first place. Don't get burned, and I'll see you next week. Bye. Pray to God that stays. Oh shit. Oh my god. My heart's in my arse. That wasn't fun. There's bloody loads of them. This bit of hair, I don't know what's happened, but it just wants to go to the other side and it's not invited. I need to sneeze. So this is how bad my spelling is when I'm like writing a script, because I'm just trying to do it so quickly I don't care how it's spelled because I'll know what I mean. So I wrote Massachusetts and I've spelt it Mastettutis. Jesus! I need to check if I'm filming. I've just thought it's fell off twice. Is it actually filming? What's the word? What's the word? What's the word? I need to sneeze. Excuse me. The gentleman that, sorry, year old missing. Been with the, interested. God, why can't I get a sentence out? Final steps. No. his Jack's mother. No, we know where Jack is. Fuck. Darius. Receptionist who said she worked for Darius. She did work for Darius. Okay.